The Square Ball Podcast.
Hello there and welcome to the show. It's brought to you by West Yorkshire Electrical, powered by West Yorkshire Electrical. If it has wires in it, they will work with it, covering West Yorkshire, the whole of Yorkshire and beyond. wyelectrical.co.uk for details on that. Or find them on your socials as well, including solar panel installation, because they specialise in renewables, battery storage to go with your panels, EV chargers, fire alarm systems, school contracting, CCTV, you name it, they do it. Get in touch with them if you have electrical work that needs doing. Finance available for work on your home or your business as well. wyelectrical.co.uk for details on that. Phil Hay, hello to you. Our usual Monday dates. First things first, you didn't give him a 20-minute text message as per usual.
I do have mitigation for that. There were issues with WhatsApp at Rotherham for some reason, so I didn't get your message until half-time, at which point I was able to reply and basically say, what a shit goal that was.
Yes, it was. And Daniel Farker actually, in his comments, cut a pretty frustrated figure on Friday.
Championship seasons are very long, so you have to kind of let these things go quite quickly, and particularly because it's Swansea on Wednesday, then it's Middlesbrough on Saturday. It's another busy week, so it doesn't do to dwell too long on Rotherham. But I think he will be pretty annoyed about that result. And I got the sense in the press conference afterwards that he did see how big an opportunity had been missed. He was actually fairly unprompted when it came to the comments about them being, as he put it, a bit too pleased with their dominance. I think for the first time, he was maybe hinting at the possibility that the players had been a little bit too casual, a little bit too relaxed. He did say that he wouldn't have called it sloppiness. He wouldn't necessarily have called it complacency. But I think that was almost what he was getting at, that at 1-0 so early on, and given the amount of control that they had in the first half, which I thought was pretty impressive, actually. I mean, they did dominate that half, and they did keep Rotherham under wraps. They kept them a long way from goal, but they didn't score a second. And I think the risk was always that if Rotherham managed to nick a goal from very little, which in the end they did, it would change the fixture, it would change the balance of it, and it would create the kind of game that Rotherham needed. It was a big shot in the arm for them at a point where it seemed like they were going nowhere. And I think he came away from that, much as I think Ipswich will have done the same when they drew 2-2 at Rotherham. He did appear to come away from that on Friday night thinking, that's a poor result for us. That's not great. You're going to have them over the course of a season. There are going to be occasions, like with Stoke away, where games that you feel you should win, or games that you feel you've got impetus and momentum going into, get away from you. But I felt like that was very avoidable on Friday night. It was one of those classic games where a team in total control who were looking on a different level to the opposition let the opposition back into it and paid the price.
Yeah, very much so. I made that point as we sort of tackle the fans' view on the match ball. I said that it was very reminiscent of their game versus Ipswich. If you can have an early sucker punch versus Ipswich, and a late sucker punch, which is exactly what they did to them, even though Ipswich had all the running in that game. And the same happened against the Leeds, didn't it? Bit of naivety maybe creeping into it. Phil, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I mean, I totally understand really that it as the results go well, that it potentially gets into your head, that it is, flowing nicely and it is going smoothly. And particularly when you score early on and score as Leeds did. I mean, I thought it was a terrific goal. Pretty much what Leeds have been getting from Rutter all season, that lovely around the corner pass, just knowing exactly where the man is. And then a great finish from Somerville as well, which has been one of his big strengths since August. He is looking like a really good finisher who knows exactly where the goal is. It was just set up perfectly to be not necessarily similar to the Huddersfield game where you score once, you get in control and you go forward from there, but to be quite a comfortable night. And I have to say, until Rotherham equalised, it felt comfortable to me. I don't think in any way it was a poor performance in the first half. I thought it was very competent. I thought there was a lot that was good about it. And as I said, they were pretty controlled. But the goal was an absolute mess. It was almost like a moment in time where 6 or 7 players just got totally consumed by ineptitude. There was the kind of poor touch from Firpo further up the pitch. There was, I thought, Kamara and Somerville overplaying slightly in an area where you couldn't really afford to do that, or you were putting yourself at risk. And maybe that's what Farke was touching on afterwards, just that little bit of overconfidence. And then multiple opportunities to either block the ball, clear the ball, to prevent that going through, and a finish inside Millier's near post. So it wasn't as if anybody in blue was shining in that moment. And I'm still actually quite surprised looking at it, how much that changed the game, how much it did. I still felt at half time, considering the way Leeds had played, that it was set up for them to go on and win that. But there was a difference I felt in the level of Rotherham's intensity and organisation after half-time. I did think they were very, very disciplined in the second half, pressed far better, maintained the shape far better, didn't let Leeds play. And I think from Farke's point of view, thinking about his role in it personally, I think he'd be quite frustrated that tactically he wasn't able to change it enough in the second half until, the flood of players came off the bench in the way that we had at Norwich, where it was basically all out attack for the last 20 minutes or so. But that's not really a tactical plan, if that makes sense. That's a kind of, let's go for gold and try and dig this out.
We've seen it a few times this season, though, haven't we? Teams have kind of stood off us or sat deep, maybe shown us a little bit too much respect, and then suddenly they get a little bit of impetus, or they get a rocket at half-time from the coach or the manager or whatever, and they look like a different team in the second half. We saw it a little bit with Plymouth, didn't they? They stood off us, but then they kind of got the bit between the teeth after half-time.
Yeah, although I would say Norwich is an example were probably the opposite. I thought Norwich were at the best and looking most likely to win that game when they actually played Leeds at their own game, came at them, took risks, created chances. It was in that period of the game where they started to get tight and started to sit a little bit deeper, bearing in mind that their form had not been good going into that game at all. That was the point where you felt like Leeds were going to get something from it. And that was the point where you felt like Leeds were able to play on the tension at Carrow Road. And I guess the kind of underlying anxiety in Wagner's players that it wasn't going to happen for them and that they hadn't been on a particularly good run. There were moments on Friday, without a doubt, that were crucial as well. The penalty that wasn't given on Dan James, the disallowed goal. I have to say, Farke was making the point afterwards that he thought the penalty was very clear. And I have to say, in the moment, I couldn't see it. I didn't have a clear view of the challenge. I was well aware that James had been absolutely smashed. I mean, you could tell that it was a proper crunch from Peltier. But we had bodies in front of us from the angle we were sat at in the press box. So it was difficult to tell the height of his feet and how much contact he'd made with the ball. But when you watched it back, that is a definite penalty without any question. I think Farke's frustration in relation to that was that, Bamford was very, very fractionally offside and that was given. I think you have to be fair in saying that was the right decision, I thought. The linesman did get that right and it was extremely tight. But I think for Farke, he was looking at the penalty decision and thinking that is really clear. That's if the referee's there and it's in his eye line, that should definitely be given. Whereas you've got the offside decision, which is really, really marginal and yes, slightly off and they get that one right. So that I think is an annoyance for the head coach and was a definite annoyance for Farke. But I'm not sure that was really the story of the evening. I think those were moments in which Leeds could have got away with that second half. But the fact that they were needing to get away with it tells you how it had gone from half-time onwards.
Yeah, we said the same. Yeah, definitely offside. And yeah, it was definitely a penalty, but you don't always get those, do you, in real time? It's hard to tell with the speed of the game as it is now. Exactly.
It was a bad challenge, though.
Yeah,
It was a very poor challenge, that, and not a good decision to miss. But these things happen.
Just going back to Georginio Rutter and his role in the goal for Leeds, another really, really good visionary pass to set up Somerville, as you mentioned. He was a little bit off it, though, wasn't he, on Friday? He didn't seem quite his usual self, maybe coming back from the international break. What do you think from a journalistic point of view on that one?
Well, he'd had an abdominal strain. He played in one game for the under-21s for France, but not in the second. I was looking for the lineups at the start of the week, and he was listed as having been on the bench, but we were asking Farke after the Rotherham game how it had been, and he'd been implying that Rutter had to withdraw early from that game because he'd had this abdominal problem. And when we spoke to Farke on Wednesday, he was very much implying, I felt, that Rutter might miss out. And I don't know if it was maybe a bit of psychology, a little bit of mind games to make Rotherham think. But that hasn't really been the way in which Farke has operated so far. He's been pretty straight with his team news and his injury updates. So I think there was a fair chance that Rutter might have missed out on Friday. It seemed like a really positive thing that he was actually starting. But it's hard not to think that if he'd been struggling to train and if he'd had that injury beforehand, that it maybe constrained him slightly. And I think you're right. I mean, that moment was absolutely great. And I think that is one of his really big strengths, is his vision, his passing. He's not, to this point, looked like a really prolific finisher. But that side of his game, I think, is a massive asset to Farke. But no, I totally agree with you. I think probably not on it in the way that he would have wanted to be.
Yeah, we got his Instagram story, didn't we, in the run up to the start of the game, and you thought, oh, maybe he features then, despite the kind of doubts expressed by Farker. Terry Venables passed away over the weekend as well, former Leeds manager. Worth perhaps just touching on that. We are going to cover that in some more depth on one of our other shows as well. A guy who didn't have a great time of it at Leeds, but as we now know, looking back on the history of that particular spell, it was just as things were starting to fall apart behind the scenes. You know, players being sold from under him when he was told that they wouldn't be.
Very, very unhappy time. Two things jump out to me about the Venables. I'll stick my head about the Venables era. Bearing in mind that I wasn't covering it at that point and wasn't even at the Evening Post at the stage when he was manager. I always remember his first game against City. Leeds beat City 3-0 at Ellen Road, first day of the season, and somebody asking him afterwards, do you think Leeds could be in contention for the title this season because of the quality of the performance? And that always stuck in my head because of how badly wrong it went from that point onwards. I mean, the answer to that was, with hindsight, absolutely not. You know, it was quite the opposite, and it was relegation they were fighting. But I think nothing more so than Venables and Ridsdale sat in that press conference after Woodgate had been sold. Even now, I wrote about that a little while back, and the kind of discussion about why it had been done, why it had happened, why they decided to do it. And I think that to a certain extent, Venables was wanting to have his say and to express his displeasure. I think from Ridsdale's perspective, he wanted to try and paint a bit of a united front about this, when it was perfectly clear. I mean, if you've ever read Ridsdale's book that he released about 15 years ago, he says in there that when he sold Woodgate to Newcastle, he said to Freddie Shepherd, "This will cost me my job. This just will not wash, and there'll be no way out of this, and I'll have to go." And he said, Shepherd totally understood that, but football being football, business being business, Newcastle took Woodgate because he was an absolutely quality central defender. But that was a massive setback for Venables, and I think that was the realisation that it was all about to run aground very quickly. It wasn't as if Venables to that point had built and maintained an outstanding team. There were problems anyway, and it clearly wasn't going anywhere. But I suspect this is probably true of quite a few coaches who've gone through Leeds over the years. To apportion the blame to him alone would be to ignore a hell of a lot of what was going on in the background. And perhaps with the exception of 07-08, the administration summer, and let's be honest, that was a legacy of what had gone on before anyway. There can't have been a bigger crisis point in Leeds history, than that stretch from 02, 03, 04, when the whole place was on fire, and it was literally burning to the ground.
And then we got the sucker punch of administration and a further relegation in 2007. But again, a story for another day. Bit of a strange weekend in the sense that we were the Friday night game. And I remember saying to you as we previewed the match that we had the opportunity to put down a marker for the rest of the promotion candidates heading into the weekend. Now, as it was, came out of Friday feeling pretty frustrated. That Venables passed away on Sunday, so I spent quite a lot of Sunday because it felt quite distant from the game itself on Friday night. Spent quite a lot of Sunday thinking about Venables' time at Leeds, and then the collapse, the Champions League era, but then also regressing back towards Euro '96. So it was a bit of a strange weekend in the sense that we were the Friday night game, and then that came around quite unexpectedly, I think, on Sunday morning, the passing of Terry Venables. But you're right as well, just to return to a theme we touched on earlier about letting these ones go sometimes. I sort of made an active decision on Saturday to just let this one go from an emotional point of view, from a fan's point of view, particularly when you saw the results coming in from elsewhere. And okay, Leicester won, but Ipswich dropping points again. So as it turned out, it was a weekend where we clawed a point back, actually. So even if you don't come out of the weekend feeling bubbly and on top of the world, it's an improvement on what we thought it was going to be like on Friday night at full time.
I think two things you have to think about. The first is that you can't win every game. You're not going to knock off 46 wins through a season. The other is that you always have to kind of look for trends with this stuff. So the thing that sort of jumps out into my mind is the 1920 season, the other side of Christmas, when suddenly it wasn't going well and they'd lost down at QPR. They'd been beaten away at Forest the night of that kind of infamous Luke Ayling interview. And by that point, what was a very, very good team were clearly in a little bit of trouble. They clearly lost the form. They clearly weren't playing as well as they could have been playing, or delivering results as fluently as they have been before. So you started to ask the question, where is this going? And is this now a major problem? And obviously they went to Brentford with Bielsa midweek, following week, played extremely well. And that was just like a massive line in the sand. It seemed to cleanse everything, and they went forward from there and deservedly won the title. If you're looking for the overall trend of where Leeds are in terms of results at the moment, it's very, very good. It is very good. The form is excellent, and a draw at the end of a streak of, a good patch of wins doesn't make it a particularly poor result. Farke was trying hard to make that point afterwards, actually, that away from home, against a team like Rotherham, who do know how to scrap, and actually have been much better at home than they have anywhere else this season. Maybe it's not the worst result in the world, but I think he was struggling to say that in a way that convinced anybody that he actually felt like that. So much of what he said before, I think, was indication that, 2 points dropped without any question. If you're, 3-4 weeks down the line and suddenly the form has been patchy, the results have been more patchy, then, it becomes more of an issue and it becomes more of a concern. But I think pick through any fixture list, give or take, of teams who've gone up through the Championship, and there will always be results in there that stand out as being pretty odd, pretty avoidable. Strange given the respective positions of the team, but in the grand scheme don't necessarily make a huge difference.
Well, the action does come thick and fast in the Championship, Phil, and it's December at the weekend as we face Middlesbrough. I don't know why that feels like it's come around very, very quickly. We will preview that towards the back end of the week this week, after the Swansea game, which we've got on Wednesday. Just with December in mind, I'm going to give a massive commercial plug now to the Christmas jumper that is on sale, the new TSB Christmas jumper. And I'm mentioning it to you specifically because you modelled it for us in the Lowfields Tunnel, and when you see it, a thing of beauty, a thing of hideous beauty, maybe. That's the jumper, not you, Phil, by the way, I'm talking about. You will see that it makes sense to photograph it in the Lowfields Tunnel because of what it looks like.
Definitely. If you were unlucky enough to be walking through there on that particular rainy day, you'd have seen me half naked at points. So don't let me put you off buying it, because it's a lovely jumper. Yeah,
that one goes on sale on Tuesday. That's Tuesday, the 28th of November, as we look at it now at the time of recording. So have a look at that at thesquareball.net. Thank you very much for allowing me that hideous commercial message. But it's one for your Christmas party, let's put it that way, rather than general day-to-day wear, I would say.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, and to Swansea then. What do we expect from this then? A team fired up to put right what they didn't get right on Friday, maybe a team that looks to be a little bit more clinical and take charge of a game, Phil?
Yeah, and perhaps a few players who are a bit more able to offer a bit more. Rutter, you would think, will be, you would hope anyway, will be more recovered than he necessarily was on Friday night. Struijk, I would suspect, can't be far away from coming back into the team. It was quite remarkable, actually, that him and Byram were in contention for that game on Friday. Because when we spoke on the podcast last week, we'd said, the indications have been that they wouldn't be, that they wouldn't have a chance. And when we got up to Thorpe Arch, Farke said himself, I'm really surprised to be saying this, but, the back train, they looked after themselves really well. Medical staff have done the jobs. They are in the mix for that fixture. So I think if Struijk is fit, Struijk plays without a doubt. You're right about what you said about December, though, and it's significant that December's here because it's such a busy month. I mean, there's so many games through that stretch, and some really key fixtures as well. None more so for Leeds, I wouldn't say, than Ipswich at home just before Christmas. And none more so elsewhere for Leeds than Leicester and Ipswich playing each other immediately after that as well. That is going to be a really, really important 3 or 4 day spell, which could change the table quite a lot. But this is where you have to be consistent. It's not where you have to rattle off win after win after win, but it's where your form has to be good and has to stay good to keep you in touch.
It's funny looking at Swansea as another team that's in the sort of lower middle reach of the table. They've got 20 points on the board, so they're a good 8 points clear of Rotherham, who occupy 22nd spot and the highest of the relegation spots. But they've played 17, they've won 5, drawn 5, lost 7, neutral goal difference. Kind of the space that Leeds United used to occupy in the landfill years, the kind of the 15 years. Not the 15 years, the 15th years.
Yes, yeah. The landfill years is a great phrase. I'm going to thieve that and use that at some point. Yeah, it was like that. I know a few people who follow Swansea, and they've said really from the off, but increasingly latterly, look, we are not going to bother the playoffs at all this season. We're just not that sort of side. So I guess this falls into the category of game that we've spoken about an awful lot. Not so different to Plymouth and others, the sort of game at home where you have to find a way through it, don't you? You have to make it happen. I'd be surprised if this is a championship classic for us at Elland Road, but it's a very, very winnable game again. And, notwithstanding the fact that it didn't work out at Rotherham, should have worked out at Rotherham, but didn't. I think Leeds have been pretty good in these fixtures. I think Farke has found a pretty good model for getting through them.
I mean, we've taken away their goals from their side, haven't we, in the form of Joel Piroux, and obviously there's the Dan James narrative to factor into this as well, which adds a little bit of something to this fixture, doesn't it? Yeah,
it does, and I still maintain that I think both of those two are keeping their places on merit. I didn't think James had a particularly great game at Rotherham, but he has been very good this season, and I think one of the players who's really benefited from the chance to draw breath a little bit and have a touch of a fresh start, I suppose. Different coach, different division, back from a loan at Fulham. That's worked for a few players to this point. And yeah, I mean, if there's anybody on the pitch who's going to want to score on Wednesday night, it'll be Piroux, won't it? And I would say to an extent, probably is due a goal.
Yeah, just returning to Friday, actually, and the impact that the sort of wide attacking players had. It was more muted, wasn't it, actually, on reflection? They didn't quite have the same influence on the game that we've seen in recent weeks against other teams. So you've got to give credit, I suppose, to Rotherham for the job that they did there.
I think you do. But I think Farke made that point, didn't he? That the phrase he used was we took the easy options a little bit too much, which I think to him, coming from him, means that they didn't push it enough. They didn't get at Rotherham enough out wide. They didn't put the pressure on as heavily as they should have done. And with hindsight, they'll absolutely wish that they should have done. I think what I noticed in the second half as well, and this has happened in sort of isolated moments with Leeds since the summer, is that the midfield didn't have the same grip of it after half-time as they did beforehand. I mean, if you watch the game back in that first half, Kamara and Ampadu are absolutely running the town. They're just on top of everything. They're controlling everything. There's really no great pressure coming from Rotherham at all. But then you flip into the second half and it is different. And, Rotherham did manage to affect that. It's not as if they don't take any credit for it. But that was possibly the area in the second half which just needed a little bit of a tickle or a little bit of an adjustment. And I think the number of attacking players on the pitch towards the end of the game, you felt as if Leeds would get there. And obviously Anthony did score that disallowed goal. It looked as if it had paid off again. But I think Farke would say himself, you don't want to be relying too often on that sort of tactical approach, that sort of throw everything in the kitchen sink and hope for the best towards the end, which was a little bit how it seemed on Friday.
Just looking at the midweek fixtures then, Phil, we've got on Tuesday the ones to keep an eye on maybe. Middlesbrough in 12th playing Preston in 6th, who are kind of on our coattails there. Maybe an opportunity for Middlesbrough to close that gap. Preston to perhaps drop off a little bit if Borough get the upper hand in that one. Also looking at Hull, who are in 8th. They're playing Rotherham at home. You'd expect them to win that one, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I think so. It's the scoreboard pressure, isn't it? I was writing about this on Friday night and I'd asked Farke about it on Wednesday, in part because of what you've been saying on the previous podcast, about the way in which you were following Rotherham Ipswich and thinking a lot about the impact on the table. It does feel like we've moved into that stage now where you have far more of an eye on what's going on elsewhere. And I think you have to. And that seemed to be a little bit in Farke's comments after the Rotherham game, just the fact that there was an opportunity to close in, there was an opportunity to just apply a little bit more stress, a little bit more pressure on other clubs. And, to a degree, they let it slip.
Do you think there's a bit more pressure on the Wednesday fixtures this midweek? And I'm looking down the list of fixtures, the really pertinent games on the Wednesday night rather than the Tuesday, which is Sheffield Wednesday facing Leicester. You'd expect that to go one way only, really, wouldn't you? Southampton have got Bristol City. You'd have to lean towards Southampton for a home win there. Sunderland facing Huddersfield. Again, you'd expect a home win. Ipswich Millwall, same story, really. So the Leeds have to win this one against Swansea.
I think it's an important game to win. Absolutely. I think a lot this season is going to rest on the record at home and how often they're able to get through teams who will come and try and be not negative, but won't push themselves forward to any great degree. And I think we'd be quite content to go away with a point from Elland Road. I suppose you listening through those fixtures there underlines the reason why, from journalistic point of view or for supporters, it's absolutely fine to monitor and follow results elsewhere. But as a footballer, you can't afford to, can you? There's too much happening. And it does just become a huge distraction. And I think, again, to go back to the schedule through December, you've got so many games and you'd be playing so many times that if you're concentrating too much on how the table's moving, or I guess more to the point, how it might move depending on permutations and what happens, then you've not really got your head or your eyes in the right place, have you? I guess that is one of the challenges for a manager at this time of year, is just to keep on the straight and narrow and to apply that message of just, fixate on your own fixtures. Don't worry about other people's. I don't ever feel like that's so much of a cliche, to be perfectly honest. I think Farke probably had it right on Wednesday when he was saying, when you get down to the real sharp end of the season, the last 6, 7, 8 games, then to an extent, you do have to look at what's going on elsewhere, because it's not a marathon anymore, is it? It is that sprint of short number of matches, which will decide everything. But at this point, there's still so far to go, so many games to be played, that it doesn't really do you any good.
Yeah, that's why I was able to let this one go over the weekend, particularly because Ipswich dropped points. And you sit there thinking, I don't know, I hope that they're just regressing to the mean a little bit more after their really, really bright start, but a good opportunity for them to get points on the board midweek. You can kind of tie yourself in knots with this stuff, can't you? As you say, like, you've just got to run your own race to all intents and purposes, and hope that when it comes to the shakedown at the end that you've done enough. And we're not tracking too badly at all. I mean, a win on Wednesday would then put us just back within touching distance of the 2 points per game. So you're trending towards over 90 points over the course of the season. So you would expect that, that would get you there or thereabouts, wouldn't you?
Yeah, and I think if you beat Swansea, then Rotherham doesn't feel like such a bad result. If you have a poor night against Swansea, Rotherham feels worse, and suddenly that looks like a bad patch. With Middlesbrough to come on Saturday, it does just hike the pressure up. But that's why the teams who get out of the Championship are those who can maintain consistency. That's what does it for you in this league. Farke was talking on Wednesday about 20 wins for the playoffs, 26 wins to go up automatically, which obviously you need to factor draws into that as well. It's not as if those wins will be enough by themselves. But that's how it has to be. It doesn't need to be up with 105 points. You just have to hit a certain benchmark and a certain level of performance. And I would say that at the moment, Leeds are not far away from that.
Well, here's to another 3 points then midweek, Phil. Let's hope that they do bring on the bacon with that one. And we'll preview Middlesbrough towards the back end of the week and react to the Swansea game as well. So looking forward to Wednesday then. Another chilly night at Ellen Road. Weather's turned even worse here in West Yorkshire.
Yeah, Rotherham was definitely the first cold one of the season, I thought. But it's going to be an interesting week, this. Looking forward to Swansea, but I think looking forward more than that to Middlesbrough on Saturday. They have really started to find a little bit of form, Middlesbrough, and have got themselves into the sort of position they'd want to be in. So that is going to be a big game. The
Sam Greenwood derby. By the way, did you see the comments that I think it was their director of football, successor to Victor Orta, mentioned that while they did have an option on him, they would have to see whether Leeds went up or not, because if Leeds go up this season, then what he was hinting towards was a wage increase for Sam Greenwood that might then put him beyond their price range.
Yeah, it is all tricky in the same way as you get wage reductions when you come down, you tend to get wage increases when you go up. And it's not the only player by any stretch, Greenwood at Leeds, who other Championship clubs would find difficult to fund, irrespective of how much football they've played or where they are in their careers. And that, again, is the kind of disparity between the Premier League and the Championship. But their option stands at £1.5 million. And I think as a basic fee, that's looking like pretty good value if he carries on the way that he's going. It's an interesting one, really, because I don't get the sense that there are many people down here who regret the fact that Leeds let him go, or particularly regret the fact that he was allowed to go to Middlesbrough. I think everybody understood, given the circumstances, that he had to go out and he'd want as good a move as possible. But you would say that, as it stands, the better half of that deal seems to have been struck by Middlesbrough.
We'll talk more about that actually towards the back end of the week then, as we do preview the game. We'll save that one for then. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of the week, Phil. Wrap up warm for Wednesday, and we'll catch up sort of Thursday, Friday, yeah?
Thank you.
We'll see you soon.
The Square Ball Podcast.